Welcome. On behalf of the College of Forest Resources, I wish to welcome all of you to the 8th Denman Forestry Issues series entitled Wildfire in the West. We look forward to an exciting and informative program today. The purpose of the Denman Forestry Issues series is to provide information and discussion on timely forestry and natural resource issues. As with all the activities associated with an academic setting, our ultimate goal is to inform and educate our students, faculty, and staff, as well as resource professionals, landowners, and the general public. These programs are made possible through the generous support provided by the Denman Endowment for Student Excellence in Forest Resources, and they support the college's vision of being a world-class and internationally recognized source of knowledge relevant to environmental and natural resource issues. The mission of the College of Forest Resources is to study and investigate the sustainability and functionality of complex natural resource and environmental systems in both natural and managed environments using an interdisciplinary approach across multiple spatial and temporal scales to include our urban, suburban, and wildland landscapes. In our college, we focus on programs in sustainable forestry, sustainable urban ecosystems, and sustainable forest enterprises. Sustainability serves as the cornerstone of our programs and includes all resources such as timber, water, or wildlife, for example, considers the needs of future generations as well as those of the present, and strives for a dynamic equilibrium that balances ecological functions and conditions with social and economic factors. Today, we wish to focus on the topic of natural resource and environmental sustainability issues related to wildfire and fuel conditions throughout our western forest. Decades of effective fire suppression have created overly dense forest made up of small diameter trees of shade-tolerant species. Overcrowding and the ensuing loss of tree vigor have led to an increased risk of insect and disease attack, tree mortality, increased fuel loads, and greatly increased risk of wildfire. Protection and restoration of our forested ecosystems is essential to achieve and maintain a sustainable environment. Managing fire-prone forests through the use of thinning and prescribed fire over repetitive cycles is a critical element to regaining the balance we seek. Recently, Forest Service Chief Dale Bosworth identified 4 challenges or threats to national forest management. These include the most appropriate way to manage fire and fuels, the growing occurrence of invasive plants, animals, and diseases, the loss of open space to development, and the growing occurrence of unmanaged outdoor recreational activities. Combined, the first 2 issues are often referred to as the forest health problem, the subject of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act recently enacted by Congress. A few national-level statistics will help us understand the magnitude of the growing wildfire threat in the West. This graph shows the number of acres burned between 1960 and 2002 on Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and U.S. Forest Service lands, plus all state lands. The 7 million acres burned in 2002 have only been exceeded in magnitude 3 times over the last 44 years. Yet, this is happening despite a decrease in the number of fires occurring each year. As a consequence, the fires that do occur are much larger in size. And as shown on this graph, between 1994 and 2002, the dollars spent fighting wildfires have increased dramatically. This graph only includes cost for the 5 federal agencies previously listed. Not depicted is the additional fact that many wildfires are destroying structures and taking human life in the urban-rural interface, as well as on wildlands, and that the severity of the fires is much worse due to the heavy fuel loads. The topic in today's Denman Forestry Issues series is wildfire in the West. We are joined by speakers from government agencies, conservation groups, and higher education. Our moderator for this program is Professor James Agee from the UW College of Forest Resources. Jim is a nationally recognized expert in fire ecology. Thank you for joining us for this Denman Forestry Issues series.
We're going to be beginning session 2 of Wildfire in Western Forests, Desired Future Conditions. And we have a series of 4 speakers who are going to be presenting some perspectives on these desired future conditions. Our first is Larry Mason. Larry's the project coordinator for the Rural Technology Initiative here in the College of Forest Resources. Without further ado, Larry Mason.
Good afternoon. Today I've been asked to speak to you on the market and non-market values of fuel reduction. This work is part of a broader study that was funded by the Community Assistance and Economic Action Program within the multi-agency National Fire Plan. So why are fuel reduction activities needed? Millions of acres of wildfires per year, billions of dollars spent every year, losses of habitat for endangered species, post-burn regeneration failures, the list goes on. Sediment, erosion, aesthetic disasters may limit rural tourism opportunities. Increases in atmospheric carbon from smoke give greater concerns about global warming. And perhaps most importantly, we may lose an opportunity to restore overstock stands to more fire-safe and stable pre-settlement conditions. The choice is really very clear for some of these forests that are now overstocked with dense stands of a small diameter, shade-tolerant species. We can do restoration efforts and have something that's similar to this in our future, or we can do nothing, and many of these acres will burn, often with catastrophic crown fires. So what is a fuel reduction activity? Well, it's a removal of excess trees and ladder fuels to reduce risk of catastrophic fire. Why would this be problematic? In recent years, any activity that involves harvesting on the national forest is politically charged, often controversial, and sometimes these small diameter trees cost more to get out than the value that they may have in the market. Does this process work? This is actually an image from a Tyee fire in 1994. This picture was taken a couple of years later. This is a situation where a crown fire came in from the left of your slide, entered into a fuel break that had been thinned a few years previous, went down to the ground instead of consuming the stand, burned on the ground through the fuel break, and when it got to the other side, went back into a dense overstock stand, rose back into the crown, and stand mortality resulted. There are many market and non-market values associated with fuel reduction that perhaps ought to be included in a broader cost-benefit assessment. For example, this is a graph of firefighting costs per acre from 1992 to 2002. On the Fremont and Okanagan National Forests. The graph shows cost per acre by event magnitude, but you can see that the average for all acres where firefighting activities took place was $1,172 an acre. Firefighting is expensive. It's also dangerous. We can see our firefighting costs, and we can go down to include other costs which we can calculate from government records. Fatalities avoided, facility losses avoided, timber losses, as I just mentioned in the previous slide. Regeneration and rehabilitation costs can be determined. Community value of fire risk reduction. These numbers are taken from some willingness to pay survey studies. Increased water yields. We can estimate the difference in the available surface water from the removals of overstock stands. And of course, regional economic benefits. Regional economic benefits include direct and indirect job multipliers, as well as the tax benefits at the local and state and federal level. We also have some costs, though, that we must look at as well. The operational costs have been an obstacle in the past. And our calculations showed that operational costs on the 2 forests we examined to remove trees 9 inches in diameter and less were $374 an acre after the value of the wood was considered. So we also looked at Forest Service contract preparation costs. The average cost for the last 3 years has been $206 an acre. That gives us a total cost to put forward a fuel removal activity contract of $580. I think we can easily see that there are tremendous public savings to be had from investments in fuel removals. Put it in a broader context, the Fremont National Forest and the Okanagan National Forest have 1.3 million plus acres in high and moderate risk. The total no-action liability would be well over $2 billion. Even with the investment of $580 an acre to prepare for fuel removals activities, the net savings after treatment costs could be greater than $1.3 billion on just these 2 national forests. And there are other values that we haven't been able to consider yet. How do we value habitats of sensitive species that might be lost to forest fires? Historically, our government has placed a very high value on habitats for threatened and endangered species. What is the cost of carbon that's released into the atmosphere? What are the implications for global warming? Values for protected habitats, carbon credits, and others are needed to complete the benefit cost analysis, but preliminary results seem to indicate that the cumulative environmental and economic costs associated with no action are very substantial. Additional benefits may be gained from fuel removals, such as clean energy. Harvest simulations of trees 6 inches in diameter and less for the Okanagan National Forest showed that there would be 124 million cubic feet of forest biomass available for cogeneration feedstock. This is enough biomass to produce 8 to 10 megawatts per year for 20 years. Such a cogeneration facility that is locally situated could provide economic opportunities for rural communities, could be the center of industrial activity, could also reduce transmission line costs so that power is not needed to be brought in. Value-added products offer additional economic benefits. Additional economic benefits would reduce the cost of the harvest activity by increasing the value of the products removed. Seen here are composite wood products being developed at Washington State University, post and pole construction, flooring being developed by community groups over in the Okanagan. Also, there are innovative approaches that benefit the environment and create value. In this slide, you can see wildlife-friendly wooden fences made out of these hazardous fuels. Here's an example where small diameter hazardous fuels have been used to create coarse woody debris for a habitat restoration project. And here's an example where these small diameter fuels have been used to create structures to decrease levels of erosion and hold unstable banks. In conclusion, we're left with the question, should we regard these small diameter materials as a liability or an asset? I think we've seen that there's a tremendous potential future cost in forest fires if we don't treat these stands. That would indicate that there are public savings to be had. We can also see that there are a number of applications for these small diameter fuels. They could create economic opportunities in depressed rural communities. If we look back at our market and non-market value calculations, we can see that just the tax revenues would largely defer all the negative harvest costs associated with small diameter removals. The conclusion that we came to in our study is that given the development of the proper infrastructure, small diameter materials could indeed be an asset, and we could, in fact, use this asset to help restore portions of the national forest to more stable pre-settlement conditions. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Richard Everett, currently head of R&C Kona Environmental Research in Hawaii. Rich has worked for 30 years in the past for the Forest Service. Rich?
The problem. Landscapes ready to burn, landscapes that I've already burned. That sort of sums it up. What do we do? What can we do to reduce the catastrophic fires that we see in the West? And once we have a fire, what can we do to redirect that forest so it doesn't experience these catastrophic fires in the future? Given the extent of the problem and the public constraints on what we can do on the land, I personally don't see an answer. However, I think we're in an adaptive management mode to try to find a solution to that problem. I'm a plant ecologist, and I'm going to give you my points of view as to how we may improve the situation. But my points of view are subject to review by qualified fire ecologists that I sit among. Eastside forests are disturbance-driven. All biomass is cycled over time. Therefore, our goal is not to sustain the current forest. Our goal is to build resiliency in those forests for future fires. We need to reduce the continuity across the landscape and fuels. But when we do this, we need to integrate that fuels management into the broader ecosystem management program. We need to guarantee the public that we are going to take care of their wildlife habitat, their fisheries habitat, their timber. So how do we do this? Well, we need a publicly supported disturbance regime. What's that? That means that we do things on the landscape that the public agrees is necessary, but still protects their other values of that forest that they value. Basically, it's impossible to treat every acre on the landscape for fuels. This is a picture of fires in Idaho. Obviously, to the left there, we have the public that has an aversion to extensive timber treatments for thinning. Obviously, people downwind have now developed an extensive aversion to smoke, whether it be by planned fires or others. What we need is a biologically, socially, and economically process to multiply our effects on the landscape. So what is a multiplier effect? Well, we may create one if we only have to treat a portion of the stands. And by treating a portion of those stands, we actually break up the fuel continuity across the landscape in its entirety. The thesis of this presentation is to do this through landscape diversity. Create stands diverse from what their neighbors are. Reduce that fuel's continuity, and by reducing that fuel's continuity, reduce the potential for catastrophic fires. And this has the additional benefit, this diversity will meet public expectations for other things they wish on the landscape, perhaps like deer habitat or elk habitat. So if disturbance-susceptible habitat is dispersed throughout the landscape, then our disturbance effects can be constrained. However, if our disturbance-susceptible habitat is continuous, as in this example of a spotted owl neighborhood in eastern Washington, and you look at the crown fire potential because of dense, multi-layered stands, you see that we're going to have a run over the entire neighborhood if a fire should occur. And that's exactly what did happen for the Hatchery Fire and for the Taiyu fires. We did lose spotted owl habitat. So if flammability is related to stand age through the effects of tree density, through dead wood accumulations, then the distribution of old and young stands should be used to constrain or enhance fire on the landscape. When we start to design landscapes for reduced fuel flammability, we start by designing stands with reduced crowning potential. Our focus, we should have learned this lesson over the last 30 years. Our focus is not on the treatment. Our focus is on the desired stand we wish to achieve. okay? And we let that define the treatments which are to be applied, silvicultural and prescribed burning. Our focus is not on what we take to reduce the fuels. Our focus is on the stand we wish to have remain, and let that define what we take from the area. What we want to do is we want to create invisible fire breaks. We want the area to have reduced capacity for having a catastrophic fire and the public not know it. Let's take a look at a conceptual model of fire propagation in a ponderosa pine stand. Perhaps as we look at stand development, we will see periods where we have a high potential for crowning fire. And maybe that will go down at a different stand, perhaps a development stage, and then again rise. Well, just how do we create these stands? Well, that'll depend on the landscape that you're in. Do you have an overabundance of early successional stages? If that's the case, then perhaps you want to create stands a little bit more advanced through silviculture or prescribed fire and launch them. If you had an abundance, which I think we do, of mid-successional stages, perhaps you want to take some of them, take them back in time, have early succession, take others and try to mimic perhaps old growth. But what you're after is a diversity on the landscape of stages. Okay? The tools to create these stands are really simple in concept. You got silviculture and you have prescribed burning, but it is the application that is tremendously complex so that you don't damage the site. Well, how much of the landscape do we need to treat? Okay? According to Turner and Rahm, estimates of about 40% of the landscape needs to be treated to keep, if we were doing this in a random manner, to treat the landscape to reduce the continuity in fuels. Now, we don't have to treat the entire 40%. We can do what Dave suggested. We can link up with natural fuel breaks. On the east side, we have open pine stands on the south slopes and dense fir stands on the north aspects. So by linking our treatments with these natural fuel breaks, we can reduce the amount of land that has to be treated. Now, we can even do better than that because these random placements of stands are not the most efficient for controlling fire. Okay? But we have to ask the question first. Although these may be more efficient, are they more efficient for the bigger picture? And if they're not, maybe we have to accept the inefficiency of random placements rather than these structured fuel reduction areas. How about patch size? What should be the patch size of our treatments? This is problematic because in the east side, especially in the dry pine forest, we had large underburns. We could have tens of thousands of acres. In our stand replacement events, we're only a few acres. So perhaps we ought to look at the mixed fire regime, which is what we're dealing with, to decide what the patch size should really be. And we can do what Jim suggested. We can look at fire scars here locally and define what it was in the mixed fire regime area that we've had, or we can go, as we did to Russia, and look there to see what the patch size was in an intact fire regime in the same type of forest. What should these stands look like in the future? Well, this is a Russian stand that had a fire in the last 2 years. Okay? You don't see very many small structures, do you? The problem is we can predict what the large structures are, but we can't predict what the small structures are in these historic stands because the snags and logs don't carry forward. So what we go to Russia for is to find out what that small structure should look like. Now, this is a Russian stand that hasn't burned for 60 years. This is the type of structure we're going to have to deal with. And this, I believe, would be the mixed fire regime. What should we do in a watershed? There is no unique solution. There is no one solution. Every watershed will be different based on the proportion of the type of stands that you have. So what you have to look at is each individual watershed separately, look at the stand composition, select those stands that are underrepresented, create those stands for diversity, and put them where they can do the best good. Okay, how about burning? We've talked about, we've got areas that perhaps we can prevent from having catastrophic fires, but how about those fires that have already occurred? Okay? Anticipate burns. And if we were to treat areas and they burn, that's okay, because the legacy of our treatments carry forward. A treated area does not burn as the adjacent area, nor does it respond as the adjacent area would respond. Although we have an extensive fire, I would challenge us to emulate a different fire history. We have it in our capacity to slow tree regeneration, to hasten tree regeneration. We can create this mosaic on the landscape. And we are aided by a non-uniform burn pattern in all our large fires. So we can create this mosaic. we can set a different pathway for the future forest. First thing we need to do is conserve that post-fire diversity. Let's not have those reburn. Let's not have a reburn take those post-fire diversity out of the system. We do not want a large landscape marching forward as one developmental stage. We've seen presentations that show us that certain stages are highly vulnerable to fire. And we need to manage the overabundance of snags and logs. So what are the take-home messages? Landscape diversity provides conditions, products, for resources for our public. It increases the resiliency of the forest, and it has a reduced potential for catastrophic fire. We are not in control, okay? We are only guiding or only facilitating the way the forest goes. Every large fire sends reams of planning documents to the shredder. That's a really good statement that we're not in control, okay? Success is defined as an improvement in the situation, okay? We want to reduce the acreages which have standard replacement events. We do not want them to be completely absent because that's not part of the system. Okay? This is going to be a slow process of positive cumulative effects. And I do believe that post-burn sites provide us an opportunity to redirect forest, future forest, so we don't have this catastrophic problem. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michael Anderson. Mike is Senior Resources Analyst for the Wilderness Society and one of the nation's leading experts in national forest law and policy. Michael?
I think it's good for us to think of the problems of the fires in the West in sort of two distinct categories. One is basically looking at the problem in the context of the human communities, the wildland-urban interface zones, where so much of our firefighting attention has been increasingly focused in the recent years. Within the wildland-urban interface area, we really have a sort of a somewhat different set of problems and potential solutions. And the other problem is a much more broad landscape issue where we're dealing with wilderness areas, roadless areas, the general forest, which may be quite remote from communities, and where we think environmentalists believe that we need to take perhaps a more holistic approach towards restoring the overall landscape, not just restoring the fire regimes, but restoring the overall ecological health of the watersheds. Solutions, I think from the environmental perspective, we want to see fire restored. We want to use more prescribed fires, letting some of the natural fires, some of the lightning-caused fires not be suppressed. I think there's potential for more of the natural fires to be allowed to do their work, places like in the Pasayten Wilderness in Washington State. We need to protect the remaining large fire-resistant trees and thin those small trees to reduce the density in unnaturally dense stands. Again, also reduce grazing where we are preventing grasses from growing in and providing more natural understory conditions, protected roadless areas, and also to do a much better job with the zoning and preventing spread of residential construction into the wildland areas. And finally, I think collaboration and consensus is going to be a very important part of the solution to our problems, both with respect to the wildland-urban interface, community areas, and out in the backcountry. So the environmental community generally feels that the first priority needs to be placed on addressing that first problem, protecting the communities, and not simply because that is where the greatest public interest and concern is and expense is happening, but we think it's important for the public, for the people who live in these communities to have a sense that they are safe in their communities, so that if fires do begin up in the back country, that they themselves are not necessarily going to be endangered by the spread of those fires down into the lowlands or near the communities. The thinning of small trees is an important and complex part of the solution, and environmentalists have mixed feelings about thinning. There is a certain element of distrust that thinning is in fact simply the latest rationale for more logging, for more commercial development of the forest, more exploitation. But there's also a realization that you need to have thinning to get fire back into these ecosystems, and that if we can have a thinning regime operation that will allow for fire to be reintroduced safely into forests, so that we don't have the catastrophic crown fires that will wipe out the forest, there's going to be greater acceptance amongst environmentalists for the use of thinning. So what do we do with the thin material? Well, some of it can be certainly used for commercial products, but our preference is that the large trees, the ones that are more valuable for the forest habitat and are the more fire resistant, should not be logged, should not be thinned. Those should be left. That the focus should be on the smallest diameter trees and the understory, and that means a lot of non-merchantable material, a lot of biomass. And we would like to, I think environmentalists recognize that this is a problem, what to do with this biomass, and we're looking increasingly at options like cogeneration to utilize this kind of material. Collaboration and consensus. This is really, I think, the best way that we can get environmentalists and community members and the agencies, the forest products industry, all working on the same page. We can go take field trips, we can go look at sites, and we can oftentimes reach agreement, at least on a site-specific level, about what needs to be done. One consensus process that I've personally been involved in and has worked well is in southern Oregon near the community of Lakeview. This is next to the Fremont National Forest, and the dark blue areas are what's known as the Lakeview Federal Stewardship Unit, which is about 1/2 of the Fremont National Forest, and there is a very active collaborative effort to try to restore the ecological integrity of the Lakeview Federal Stewardship Unit, which for many years was managed very intensively for timber production for the community of and lumber mills in the town of Lakeview. We've looked at the issue of fire risk in particular in Lakeview, and we've through the research by Larry Mason and others at the University of Washington, we recognize that there is certainly high and moderate fire risk on about 3/4 of this national forest. Our collaborative group has come up with 3 overarching goals that the environmental community, the timber industry, the community leaders, the Forest Service all agree on. The first goal is that we want to sustain and restore a healthy, diverse, and resilient forest ecosystem that can accommodate human and natural disturbances. Our second goal is to sustain and restore the land's capacity to absorb, store, and distribute quality water. And our third goal is a socio-economic goal, which is to provide opportunities for people to realize their material, spiritual, and recreational values and relationships with the forest. Another way that we can build trust and consensus is through monitoring. In Lakeview, we have a very active monitoring project called the Shiwakhan Biophysical Monitoring Project. This is in the Shiwakhan River watershed within the Lakeview area. And they are collecting a tremendous amount of data on the forest area to help us figure out what is going on, what are the current conditions within the watershed, and also help us to determine what are the desired future conditions. And finally, here is just a picture of what we would like to see, what we consider to be a fire-friendly forest. This particular picture is taken in Idaho, where there has been fairly frequent low-intensity burns, and we have nice open understory and what looks to us to be a good resilient forest ecosystem. Thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce the fourth speaker in our Desired Future Conditions session, John St Pierre. John's Director of the Natural Resources Department of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation located in northeastern Washington. John?
Thank you, Professor. And thank you, the University of Washington, for inviting the Colville Tribe to show what we are doing on our reservation. This is where the reservation is north central Washington. We have approximately 1.4 million acres, encompasses half of Ferry County and Okanagan County. This is a holistic goal that the tribe we made up back, I think it was 95, and it was adopted in 96. And basically we got what is the quality of life we want, what are the forms of production to meet that quality of life, and what is our resource base to reach the quality of life that we desire. The project direction when we wrote the Integrated Resources Management Plan for the Colville Tribes was we're mandated to follow some laws. Some of those were the 53 BIM with the Department of Interior, the 30 BIM Supplement 10, to develop the Integrated Resource Management Plan. We wrote this in 3 phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. 1 was inventory analysis. Basically, we asked all resources to look back as far as you could back to see what their resource or particular resource looked like as far back as they could. And tell us what it looked like back then, what does it look like now, and why does it look the way it does right now. Phase 2 was writing the environmental impact statement for the IRMP, the Integrated Resources Management Plan. Those 2 phases were probably the easiest. At the time, didn't seem the easiest, but now we're in the implementation stage of trying to do what we wrote, which is pretty tough. Then we had to find the Colville Tribes Law, Title IV, the natural resources. The direction was that we wanted to go to all the public. We had numerous public meetings throughout the reservation, including Seattle, Yakima, and Spokane. And we wrote to government agencies, major landholders on the reservation, staff analysis, legal mandates, federal laws, and anything that the Department of Interior required us to do. Then in 2001, we signed the record decision, which is sort of historical. I think we're the only second tribe in the United States to write an environmental impact statement, and we voluntarily wrote it. These are land use categories within the reservation. Majority of them, the biggest that we're going to focus on is these right here, the commercial forest, non-productive forest, non-operable forest wilderness. It's about 800 and some thousand acres that cover this. And this is basically, I mean, we're concerned of all over the reservation, but this is the topic we're discussing today. Basic resource management principles. We want to provide for both human use and a healthy environment, and because they go hand in hand with what we believe. A healthy forest or healthy landscape is a reflection on our healthy people. We must focus on ecological sustainability to avoid single resource management. In the past, we knew that there were problems. You know, I'm not blaming anybody the way they managed in the past, because they did what they knew and what their focus was. And so what we're trying to do right now is change that mentality, because you had a forested area, all they managed was for forestry. You had a fish and wildlife area, you managed it for fish and wildlife. I mean, animals, water, they don't know boundaries. You know, they don't know where the boundaries are at. So we're trying to integrate them because we think everything relies on everything else. And most important thing is we must involve the people in the management. And that's some of the problems that well, I don't know if it's a problem, it was a challenge to do all the meetings that we had and to involve everybody as best we could, especially decision makers, our politicians, and the public as general, because if we involve them in the beginning, we believe that later down the road to make our job easier. Well, it's still tough, but I think made the road a little bit easier for us in the long run. Move toward desired quality of life. And right now, we're monitoring what we're doing. And some of the things that we're changing is, as you'll see, there's some deferred watersheds that we have had. And now we're looking at those and saying, well, maybe we don't have to defer those because of some of the things that we learned and some of the things that we're doing right now. Okay, desired future conditions. We want a sufficient high quality of surface and groundwater. Preservation of our culture and tradition as Indian people. Productive, stable soil resource. Natural, historic appearing landscapes. We want to sustain everything out there as best we can. We want abundant fish and game. Economic stability, that's the rub. I mean, before it wasn't, 200-300 years ago, economics is a little bit different than it is today. Economics then was protection, animals, fishing, huckleberries, just the gathering of stuff. Now the economic stability is money. Money makes everything run. Ecologic stability. Diverse year-round recreational opportunity. We're seeing that more on Lake Roosevelt. The alternative we adopted, we started with 6 alternatives, and we knew when we were going into developing those 6 was that everybody isn't going to agree to any one alternative. What we're going to end up having to do is come up with alternative 7. We knew this from the beginning, because somebody may like something in the first alternative and like something in the 6. Somebody will like 3 and 1, 2 and 4, whatever. But so we'd know we'd have to, with all the comments that we got, that would intermesh them to try to make it fit. This is where we come up with alternative 7. And we, it was a modification of all the 6 alternatives. The biggest thing is probably, where's that pointer at? We wanted, our immediate concern at the time was, if you guys remember back in 80s, late 80s and 90s, was bugs, ips, spruce budworm, and diseases. They're a big thing across, especially in our part of the woods. And so we wanted to go and address those problems as best we can, because you have thick, dense stands of timber, got killed, pose a fire hazard, as we've seen all over the place, and so we're trying to address that concern. We're emphasizing regeneration, harvest, to convert forest to more cereal species mix on 82,000 acres over the 15-year period, which poses, it's quite a challenge. We're going to do that by harvesting 7 to 8 million board feet off these acres, and it's sustainable. We want to protect sensitive watersheds to deferring silviculture treatments. Like I said earlier, we're re-looking at that now by the monitoring that we have done. And we're trying to figure out, well, maybe we don't have to defer those, because there's some things that we've learned right now that we might have to go in and address those problems that are within these watersheds right now. Another issue for us is this right here, emphasize road closure. There's a few things wrong when we have too many roads. Right now, I think there's like 6 to 8 miles of road, 6 to 8 miles per square mile of roads within our reservation, which is a lot. And we're trying to knock that down to 3 because there's sedimentation in the streams, and when you have that many miles of road per square mile, you put pressure on big game. Put pressure on big game, they can't have babies, so there's less population. Improve grazing management through the cross fencing. I mean, it's a mentality, it's a paradigm shift for the cattlemen we have. Before it was, you turn the cattle loose, and the mentality was leave half, take half. That was the management. We're saying, oh, that don't work anymore. So we were going to make them manage their cattle a little bit better. Tree stock controls and treatments on 13,000 acres annually. The biggest thing, and drives our FMO, or Fire Management Officer, Mr. Ike Costin, is burn 6,400 acres annually. He's saying, how can I do that with such a small window? That's what we hired him for. so pay him big money, but anyway. We're trying to get that done, and we're doing I think he's doing a really good job. These are our watersheds. We have 208 or 210 watersheds on the reservation. These right here are the extreme watersheds that we deferred. You know, that we're saying from silviculture treatments from forestry's point of view. But if forestry or if Fish and Wildlife or hydrology or somebody else wants something done in there because they see something wrong in there, you know, hey, we need this treated in here. And we try to work together to get all this stuff done. So our hydrologist, Mr. Walt Hunter, right now is re-looked at that, and maybe he doesn't want to defer those right now, you know, but we're going to re-look at it, and then we're going to see, because we want to adapt to the situation, and not just if we know we're doing something wrong, we just don't want to keep doing it. We want to change with how we monitor things. And I want to say your guys' dry year over here is our really wet year over there. We get roughly 12 to 14 inches annually on a reservation over there. And this area right here, in 2001 was a big fire we had. This area right here burned a lot. And this right here, if you remember the previous presenters, this area is a ponderosa pine site and a dry Douglas fir site. But when we had that fire, it was stand replacement fires. It should have never happened. And in a lot of cases, it just wiped everything out. And so we went out there and we're trying to plant them right now. And it should have never happened with the management that was done. But like I stated before, I don't want to blame anybody in the past. We're just trying to fix it. And we try to look at it as opportunity. Well, you know, it isn't a problem, it's opportunity. How can we capitalize on that opportunity to fix the management there? But like I said, this is dry area, and we're trying to take care of it. Fire history. As you've seen before, got high severity, the 100-year cycle, and it's up where the more water is. Moderate severity is, you know, the lighter blue stuff, and right there. So you got right through here, all the light blue is the moderate. All this stuff is high severity where it's stand replacement fires. It should never, when you get into these areas, it should never be a stand replacement fire because it's mostly ponderosa pine. And that's the low severity, 1 to 25-year fire cycle. We have 9 what we call plant association groups within the reservation. We broke them down into just 9 categories. There's probably more out there from a vegetative point of view, but we broke them down into just 9. There's the acres, and these are we call them pegs. And what we're trying to do, you know, my whole dream, I guess, is to be able to take any one of these pegs and fire goes and wipes it out. This is what it looks like. We call it stage 1, you know, in a successional series. And then you go to 10, stage 10, 1 to 10. 10 is climax, ready to die and everything. I want to be able to pick anywhere in the stages, successional stages. Say if we're at 8 right now and we want to knock it back to a 4, it looks like this right now. I want to knock it back to a 4. And then what are the plants there? What are the animals that use it? And the whole works, and be able to show people with some sort of animated tool, software system, to be able to show it to them. Because basically, I'm not going to see what we're doing right now. I'll die. My great-great-grandkids may see what we are trying to accomplish today. But these pegs right here, this is how we're managing. And we're trying to get back to the big old pine trees that was done 200-300 years ago. You know, but it's because right now the forest isn't a forest. I mean, it's a man-made forest. And it's something that we're having problems with because people right now are saying, this is the forest I know. Well, it isn't the natural forest that you know, the creator or whoever made a long time ago for us to use. It's a man-made forest, and I can't emphasize that enough because that's why everything's burning. You know, and my belief, and you know, I've been trying to get this across to people, is that you go out to the woods, you know, the forest. If you listen and look, the forest will tell you what to do and what's wrong with it. These are our acre of deviation by peg from our desired future condition. Size 5, these are little tiny trees, goes up to size 5 is great big trees. And look at, we're out here. And this is a big deal. We don't, like I stated a while back, is that we are not blaming anybody for what they did. Their goal was different than ours is today. We're seeing some of the stuff that maybe was wrong, just like 50 years from now. They may think we're crazy for trying to do what we're doing. And maybe we adapt as we go. But right now, we're trying to change this because we're out of whack with the whole desired future condition, big time. Because look at this, 5 to inch DBH. 55% of the forest out there is this, you know, and then we got this. You know, we got to flip these. This is what we want. This is what it looked like in probably the late 30s. This is what we want. And lastly, I want to thank my grandma. If we as Indian people do not protect the trees, water, animals, anything, we get the songs from, then we as Indian people are going to cease to exist. And I think that's true for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. That was a very inspiring talk. I'd just like to add some concluding comments to what our speakers have said today. They've certainly shed a lot of light on a complex issue on wildfires in the West. We've generated a huge wildfire problem over the last century, and it's not just been Claire Ryan and Dave Peterson and Larry Mason and John St Pierre and Michael Anderson and myself and Rich Everett. All of us have done it. Through the choices we've made, through the political institutions that we've supported. Through a variety of land management decisions, including but not restricted to fire exclusion, and the continued invasion of homes into wildlands, we've created an environment more flammable with higher values at risk than has ever existed before out there. The result has been wildfires more devastating than ever before. Just 3 years into the new millennium, we have records in 4 states for the worst wildfires on record: Colorado, Arizona, California, Oregon. Haven't mentioned Washington. We've been lucky so far, but our turn is coming. Our political institutions have finally recognized the gravity of the problem, but they're also willing to invest resources to address it. And this is a good thing. But as we move forward, I think we have to move forward with a degree of humility. How much of a watershed do we need to treat in order to make it fire resilient? Rich Everett told us some of the complexities involved there. We don't know, really. What are going to be some of the impacts on other resources? Well, we're not really sure about that either. We have some well-formed ideas. We have a lot of tools to work with, perhaps more so than almost any other discipline in the natural resources, and Dave Peterson talked about those to some extent. But we have to remember that ecology is inherently a science of place, that the solutions, even from just an ecological perspective, are going to vary depending upon where we are on the landscape. Just as the wildfire problem is probably not the same everywhere, the solutions are not going to be the same everywhere either. We have unique ecosystems, but we also have unique communities, and Claire Ryan spoke to those. The economics of fire surrogates are complex, and they also depend on place, as Larry Mason indicated. The risk of actions such as prescribed fire and thinning certainly have to be evaluated for their own impacts, but they also have to be evaluated against the risk of no action. No action or no active management does not mean no change. In the dry forests of the West, it means an inherent risk of wildfire and its attendant loss of ecological and social and economic values that we all recognize. We need more active management, but we also need to learn as we go. Restoration ecology, as it applies to fire hazard reduction, is a work in progress, and monitoring is essential. I think it's obvious from the presentations today that there are multiple sustainable outcomes to our current fire problems. We're not all on the same page. Winston Churchill once remarked on the British and American people, he says, we're a common people separated by a common language. And when you sit in rooms talking with people from various political perspectives, you find that you're just seemingly as far apart as possible. But when you actually begin to understand what people are saying, and one way to do that is to go out in the field, oftentimes the differences are not as great as they seem. I think that the issue of collaborative planning, such as Mike Anderson had talked about today, is one way to do this. And I think the example that the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Nation have put together in their integrated resource management plan hopefully will be a stunning success over the next decade. I think any solution is going to have a basis in ecological sustainability. But I also believe that any sustainable solution must also be economically viable, however we define that, and also socially acceptable. And all of these targets are going to change through time. They're not going to stay constant. So our clock in restoration is going to go on for a long time, and these various values, either the ecological or economic or social values, are also going to change over time. And so we have to be able to adapt to that. And I hope that the information that the speakers brought to you today have given you a good understanding of where we are along that pathway We've just begun. We have a long way to go. But it's going to be a success that hopefully is measured by our kids and by our grandchildren. And we're probably not going to be around long enough. But if we start now, we'll give them an opportunity to create a more sustainable future. In conclusion, I'd like to thank our speakers, each and every one of them. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for being patient with us. We appreciated your attendance. And at this time, simply say I hope you enjoyed our session today. Thank you.